doing it, was heading them off.
On the 20th of January 1976, Iceland threatened to break off diplomatic relations with Britain unless the Royal Navy pulled out of the 200-mile limits. Once again, the Icelandic Prime Minister flew to London, this time accompanied by experts on fish stock depletion.
Fundirnir voru haldnir in the cabinet room í Downing Street nummer 10 og Wilson satt þar á móti Geir og munurinn var sá að þegar þessi hluti kom til umræðu þá vísaði Geir þessu til okkar vísindamanna en Wilson reyndi að útskýra allt sjálfur og hann satt saman okkur með feikilegan langan reiknistokk og reiknaði ýmist prósentur af aflanum eða tonn en það var ekkert samkomulag það. Og það bætti náttúrulega ekki úr skák að það var tekið hádegisverðar fyrir daginn sem við vorum þarna og þá komu þær réttir að það var búið að klippa aftan úr breskum togara.
We bent over backwards to make conciliatory offers. I don't believe any other country in the world would have made so many constructive suggestions as we have made to the Icelandic government to try to end this dispute.
The negotiations came to nothing, and the Icelandic ambassador was called home. All diplomatic relations ceased, and the conflict at sea escalated.
We knew very little about the political background. In my opinion, this was a war that shouldn't, a phony war that should never have happened. It was caused by diplomatic ineptitude, probably on both sides.
They were quite distinctive characters, and they commanded their ships in different ways. Some were more aggressive than others. I mean, we knew a little bit about them because they were all known to us before the Cod Wars as individuals. So we had little character sketches of most of them. And we always knew if somebody was on leave and somebody else was driving instead, or whatever the form was. Yes. Oh, the driver of Balder, and I can't remember his name, but he was very aggressive.
Já, það byrjaði svona átökur eins og gerðist að Díómeda var að verja togara flota, móti að reyna að komast inn í flotan og geta beitt klippunum. Og það endaði með því að hún margsildi á okkur sko, en þó ekki. Jú, alvarlega má segja það til að öllu skemmtist og skemmtir á varskipinu. En fyrir rest, þá gekk hún í kæsir.
It seemed to me on that particular afternoon that he was determined to damage my ship. 20 attempts at collision, 4 successful.
Afturendin á Baldur, hann stökk inn í bakvörðsíðan á hann, sjóbúrsafturendin á Baldur stökk inn í og hann skildi eftir, ég veit ekki, 10 metra rifu þarna í síðan á honum. Þetta var einhverlega hann sem sá að rífa skipið vegna þess að við vorum búin að slá á stopp þegar hann lenti á okkur.
He was heavier and stronger and better built, and he had this tin opener on each of his quarters, which was very effective.
Það kom að heljar mikil rifa á hann. Þar á meðal fór hornið þarna inn á bar til þeir að setjast á yfirmann og hreinsaði veggjónum myndir af þeim fórum sjónunum.
We managed to save the photograph of Her Majesty the Queen, but regrettably His Royal Highness Prince Philip got lost in the action.
Lieutenant, this is Silla. How do you receive? Over. Stella, this is Osmond. Yes, I'm receiving fine.
Good evening, old man. This is Silla. I have some information for you. The Icelandic gunboat Aegir has just left Derja Fjord.
Svo var nú mjög vinsæl aðferð það var að það var í gegnum fjarskiptin. Það var þannig til dæmis þegar 200 míla síðu var að þá eltu freigátarnar okkur á varskipunum og melduðu alltaf af stað, stefnu og þess áttar á svona kortis, hálftíma fresti til að láta togarana vita að því hvar við værum. Og þetta voru þeir að gerðu fyrstu dagana og við byrjuðum á því með þá að taka upp á segulband þessar meldingar og síðan einhverjum dögum seinna þá byrjuðum við að spila þessar meldingar fyrir þá og sem voru þá rangar, þá voru við einhvers staðar annar staðar og þá fórum við að rugla rýmin og þá byrjuðu bresku herskipin að kalla út að þetta heyrði ekki þessa tilkynningu, þetta hefði verið fölsk tilkynning og þess áttar og þá náðum við því upp á segulband þannig að við gátum farið að þegar þeir voru að senda út raunverulega tilkynningu á stað okkar þá gátum við spilað inn í heyrðuð ekki þessa tilkynningu, þetta var raung tilkynning þannig að þeir gáðust upp á þessu mjög fljótlega.
All British trawlers, all British trawlers, all British trawlers, all British trawlers, all British trawlers. This is
plus the fact the Icelandic Coast Guard skippers, they knew the score. I mean, they was playing football on their own ground. It was their territory. They know the weather, they knew the banks where the fish was likely to be. And the British gunboat captains just know how to pass the port, after dinner. Very handy in a Cod War.
Frétti þetta fréttamann útlandur sem var hjá mér í borða sem þetta var verst þegar ég hefði aðgerði klukkan rétt fyrir 6 því það dinner hjá þeim klukkan 6 og þá fara þeir í uniform með hvítt hálstöð og slöfu og fá sér, ég held ég fá hann með eitt viski fyrir mat það er voða lítið vín en svona er eitthvað að vera og svo borða þeir allir saman nema eitt sem fyrir brú en svo byrjaði því að ég byrjaði alltaf rétt fyrir 6 að djöflast í einhverjum togara og þá var kallað í battle station og það enginn fekk að éta.
There is a picture of the Royal Navy which exists throughout the world almost that the Royal Navy captain goes from the bridge down to his cabin and has a gin and tonic, he's a steward and life is genteel. The British Merchant Navy, all the commercial ships have the same view and still do, and of course it doesn't exist, but I have to say that once the Navy is on task it's extremely dedicated. There's no drinking at sea. The rum tot had gone out by the time this Cod War was, so there was no rum in 1976. The rum went out in 1970.
Fishermen of Hull and Grimsby worried about their future.
We're involved as much as they are. They're involved in it. Everybody's involved in this trip. No, they haven't. But we haven't seen it, and we don't know what's going to happen.
There's nothing to tell us what we're coming up, so I'm coming for anything new. So I'm a bit bitter about it.
I'd rather be on the dole, sat home, let them think it all over. And then when they've got something sorted out, then we'll come back to sea.
Well, the old point is I should think I should be looking for a job when I get home.
Little progress was being made, so John Prescott, the MP for Hull East, went to Iceland to try to find a solution.
I went to meet the captain of the Coast Guard ship, who was known in our British press as the Mad Axeman, and he was standing, and there was a snowstorm, and he was standing at the gangway join it, with this kind of scrambled egg on his head and soup scarf and a goatee beard. Everything what I saw was a German U-boat commander just saluting me. And I saw a BBC camera team come round the corner, and I could see that picture at home, We have just sunk 3 trawlers today, Mr. Prescott,
Og hann kom på og vildi fá að tala við mig og það voru hérna í höfnin í Reykjavík og við varum upp á kaffi það var svona utan dag, ég átti að vera í fríi. Þetta var geðugur maður, ungur maður.
og mikið á honum, talaði mikið eins og stjórnmálamönnum tamt. Þannig að það komst enginn að nema hans sjónarmiðum. Ég var alveg sama, át mínar klauna bara.
Well, I want to talk to the people who give the commander his orders, not only the government, but the public opinion that influence the situation at the moment. And this was put in as a chance to meet the commander, and I've taken it along the lines of meeting everybody here.
John Prescott mounted an independent operation, and the Foreign Office kept telling him to come home. He wouldn't come home. He came to see me when he did come home with his own peace plan. I can't remember what the details of the peace plan were, but I know that we turned it down out of hand. It might not have been very different from the peace plan which was eventually negotiated.
John Prescott, the MP for East Hull, played a very brave role in trying to bring the two countries together and trying to get a compromise. But he was very much a lone voice. The wise voices urging compromise, urging the fact that it was inevitable that Iceland would take control of its own waters and would want to catch and land its own fish, part of nationhood, that those wise voices were very little heeded.
The collisions at sea became increasingly dangerous. One Icelandic officer died after such a collision, but by a combination of sheer luck and skillful seamanship, there had been no other losses. But on the 6th of May, 1976, the rules of engagement changed. The Royal Navy were given orders to carry out full protection.
Up until that evening, at about 7 o'clock, the rules, as far as the British warships were concerned, were very restricted, and we'd been told to do the job as best we could, but not in any way to get in a position where we would be damaged. That's our own ships would be damaged. Well, this made it really going into battle with your hands and feet tied together, and you really couldn't do anything.
Þetta voðalegt ástand að vera hermaður á velvopnuðu skipi og láta sem hvern björgunarskip angra sig.
And then at 7 o'clock on May the 6th, the change in the rules came through to say that we were now allowed to carry out full protection and to ensure that the frigates did their job. There was the possibility they might get damaged in doing it. We made it absolutely clear to each of the gunboats there that the rules had changed.
Og þá voru allir hættu að tóra og við vorum að fara yfir svæðið og enginn að fiska. Svo allt í kallar loftskiptamaðurinn í mig og segir að það einn að fiska fyrir framan okkur. Ertu viss það, segir ég? Já, ég er viss það. Hann er að 3,5 míla ferð og við tökum stefnu á hanga og þeir voru hérna rétt fyrir aftan okkur á Hálmóð.
Tia was the vessel I was marking, and she suddenly decided she'd go after one of the trawlers with her cutter down. And having a cutter down, it's quite clear that she only had one action in mind, and that was to cut the trawl of the trawler. So I closed in on the port quarter, about 100 feet away, 30-40 degrees behind, so that she couldn't hit me, whichever way she turned, and sounded a short blast and hoping that she would veer to starboard to keep away from the trawler. But she didn't, and a minute later I sounded again and then turned to starboard and hit her in the port quarter.
Ég var nýkomin í koju og var ekki sofnaður, sko. Búinn að vera eitthvað lengi á löpum. Svo var ég allt í einu bara komin upp á vegg úr kojunni, bara líka á þýrin og þessum með djöfullin sjálfur. Það ekki svefnfríður fyrir þessum mönnum.
Og kemur svona á mitt þyrluþilfarið og yfir vélarrúminu, þannig að hann hefði sett gat þar, þá voru náttúrulega grunaði það, hann ætlaði að gera það, þá voru búin að vera, sko, þá hefði vélarna stoppað.
We had this awful incident where she heeled right over to starboard and then came round port side to port side, which was quite horrific and quite horrible.
Þá hringdi niður í vélarrúm og spurði hvort það sé allt í lagi það, já, segja, það er spáleiti en það er ekkert, það er slíkinn kest.
And I hoped that no one had been thrown over the side, so I asked the captain if anyone had been thrown over the side, and he said, I don't want any help from you.
Skipið það snýrist alveg 180 gráður, snýrist alveg við og þá sé ég togarann hérna rétt hjá okkur og ég setja fulla klippurnar voru úti.
So having unwound myself and got myself into gear again, I took up the same position on the port quarter of the tier as she approached another trawler with a cutter down.
Það svona 5 mínútur þá maður klippa án tólið. Þá hann alveg trítilóð eins og ég tók vel skilið það.
I did the same routine, sounded a short blast, waited a minute or so, sounded again, waited again, and sounded the third time before I turned to starboard and hit her in the same place.
Hann keyrir þarna nákvæmlega eins og við fórum á hliðina og þegar við komum upp úr þeirri dýfu þá verðum við varið það stoppuðum báða vélarnar þegar við fórum á hliðina. Það eitthvað annar í vélinni.
Fortunately, no one was hurt, no one was killed, and there was no damage done to people. And at the end of that, it appeared the 4 gunboats then decided that they would retire. And that appeared to me to be virtually the end of the Cod War, at least the end of the Cod War up there.
Have you got any casualties, over? No, and thank God for that.
The previous month, the Labour Party under Jim Callaghan had been elected to government in Britain. Anthony Crosland, an MP for Grimsby, was appointed Foreign Secretary. He was given the difficult task of ending the Cod Wars.
Það voru stöðugar samningaumleitanir í gangi og það var verið að vinna þessum málum bak við tjöldin. Ég held nú að Bretar hafi líka verið búin að fá sig fullsadda af þessu stríði við okkur Íslendinga.
And Tony Crosland sensibly took the view that this was an absurd dispute. And even though he was a member of Parliament for Grimsby, he was prepared to concede more to stop the Cod War going on.
When he became Foreign Secretary, I just went to him and said, "Do you want a deal? The deal's been arrived." He said, "I haven't seen it." Sent for it. He sent for the deal. He went, got Friedel in Norway, and the deal then was negotiated. It was less than what I came back with, but at least it was a deal, and based on the deal I brought back from the Iceland government.
Well, a lot of people won't like it, but I've warned people in Grimsby for some time that because of the whole universal movement to a 200-mile limit, that the position of the Grimsby fishing industry was going to change and that we would see a decline in the distant water part of the fleet, although we shall certainly see a very large increase in the inshore and near water part. So I think that, I'm perfectly content to go down to Grimsby and defend this, even though it will be unpopular with some parts of my constituency.
The agreement was signed in Oslo on the 2nd of June 1976. It ended distant water fishing in Britain. The devastation was summed up by Tom Nielsen of the British Trawler Owners Federation. In an interview with the Icelandic press, he said, "You have won a great victory, and that I don't want to take away. The sad thing is that you've put a hell of a lot of hard-working and good fishermen out of work."
I was told once by a government minister that fishing was 1% of the total British manufacturing output. Fishing was 1%. So what chance did we have when we was just 1%? They didn't care a hell about us.
They were promised by the government that there would be compensation. They were promised they would have retraining. They were promised help with development so that new industries would come in diversification of the local economy. And very little of that was actually fulfilled because it was then found or thought that the fishermen were casual workers and not entitled to redundancy because the renewed their contract on each trip. This was the argument. It wasn't true as it turned out.
The trawler owners were paid £32 million in compensation. The trawlers were then tied up, scrapped or sold to other countries.
I'm not critical of the owners for getting the decommissioning money. They did lose a lot of revenue. But what's about the poor? The deckhands and the crews, they never got a penny. When our involvement with Iceland, fishing-wise, when it ceased, that was the end of an era in Hull.
Promises made by the British government to the fishing communities were not kept. Thousands of families lost their livelihoods overnight. So in 1983, the British Fishermen's Association was formed to fight for compensation and redundancy payments.
These are men, ex-trawlermen, typing out letters with two fingers on a typewriter, doing it all for themselves, not helped by government, not helped by the trade union movement, having to do it all for themselves. So I think governments of various persuasions are to blame for this current situation.
Over the years, we've written to the Queen. Prince Philip has been written to, but obviously they state it's not a matter for the palace, so they redirect it. We wrote to Margaret Thatcher, who was Prime Minister some years ago. We wrote to John Major, and we've also written to Tony Blair.
In July 2000, the persistence of the ex-fishermen and the local MPs paid off. 25 years after the Oslo Agreement, £26 million was earmarked as compensation for those who lost their livelihoods in the Cod Wars.
British foreign policy is full of occasions when we've withdrawn from things. Normally we kill a lot of people first. There may be an example in history where we have withdrawn, retreated, capitulated in the way we did over the fishing dispute, but I can't think of one. That doesn't mean we were wrong to do it. It just means it's historically unique.
The Hull docks were a sad sight.
Þegar maður gekk fram hjá tugum skipa sem búið var að leggja við landfestar til varanlega, að þá upplifði maður og upplifði ég að við hlytum að hafa valdið þessu fólki miklum skaða. Og mér var þetta hvatning til þess að við þyrftum að gera okkur grein fyrir því, að hafandi staðið fyrir því og átt hluta því, að þeim var ýtt af okkar miðum og þeir eru að leggja sínum skipum, að við erum að gæta sóknarinnar í okkar fiskistofna og gæta þess að það veri aldrei gert of frekar á þann veg að þeir byggðust upp og eldust og framtíðin og íslensku ungmenni gætu notið þess á efri árum og alltaf framvegis að fiskistofnarnir við Ísland væri í góðu ásigkomulagi og gætu þolað eðlilega sókn.